At Sight and Scene, we feature the innovators, disruptors, and changemakers using reality capture technology to drive real impact. These are the people who saw a problem, challenged the status quo, and took action, whether restoring ecosystems, improving resilience, or transforming infrastructure.
They bring a deep sense of responsibility and stewardship to their work, leveraging technologies like drones, laser scanning, GIS, and mapping to create meaningful change. More than just experts, they're storytellers, sharing their journeys and the why behind their work. Our mission is to amplify their voices, educate, and inspire others to push boundaries and take action.
Sight and Scene.
Poor decisions made on poor data just creates a really bad outcome. I will never forget one of the quotes that one of our customers said when I very first started here at Reveal. We talked about the fact that as-builts can be anywhere between 60 and 64% captured, and as low as 25% geospatially accurate, so actually where you believe it to be. And the customer was so astute. He said, well, that's 100% useless. You can't construct around that.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Sight and Scene. We are back in the virtual studio with Scott Harrigan. Scott, what's up?
Yeah, a lot going on now that we're in the middle of summer here, or almost hitting it. Here in the U.S., so exciting stuff.
It is. I always, when starting this business, I was always like, okay, I know the winter months in Portland are going to get a little lean. It's hard to fly a drone. So you got to get it while the getting's good in the summer. And we're in the thick of it too. Yeah. So it's a busy time and trying to balance that with some just life, expectations and kids, all that stuff, just working through it all, trying to keep everything balanced.
Yeah.
But we do have an exciting guest in the studio, as always, with us, and we're going to get an introduction here in just a minute. But Scott, you want to just fill me in or fill us in on any of the work happenings? Anything you could share that's exciting on your end?
Yeah, I'm going to have to give you the brief version of it in this one because there's so much. But yeah, we're doing, we got a LiDAR topos coming up this week for a survey firm. And then I think I mentioned, then I head off to the Virgin Islands in 2 weeks to train up some architects on drone work. So
nice.
I'm like hopping all over north and south of the side of the seaboard. So yeah, it's been crazy busy. I don't know, June, this is probably the busiest I think I've ever seen our June. So that's always exciting.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Same here. I'm expecting a little traveling here, probably to Salt Lake for some work, for some LiDAR work. And then
great.
Now to Southern Oregon towards the end of the summer. I'm kind of negotiating a project right now in a national park, so it's going to be kind of special authorizations for flying drones in the National Park Service. So lots of unique projects like that coming along, and working on some LiDAR and point clouds and lots of data extraction. It's all good stuff. Yeah, great. Okay, well let's get on to our guest. We are joined by another. Actually, let me get this right here. The area of the world, Oceania. Is that correct, Nick?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So if you recall, we had Paul Mead on last time from Queensland, Australia. So we're doing a little Oceania tour here. But today with us, we have Nick Hearn. Nick is the managing director of Reveal, which is a global technology company using AI and underground data to reduce risk and improve safety across infrastructure. With a career spanning leadership roles at Atomic.io, Flick Electric, Contact Energy, Loyalty NZ, and SAS, Nick has consistently driven growth through an innovative use of data and customer insights. At Reveal, he's leading the charge to bring smart, scalable solutions to one of the world's most pressing challenges, understanding what lies beneath our cities so that risk is reduced and productivity gains are realized. Nick has been instrumental in scaling Reveal's international footprint, securing enterprise partnerships, and attracting strategic capital investments. Reveal's work sits at the intersection of AI adoption and infrastructure resilience, an area of increasing urgency as urbanization accelerates and legacy underground networks become harder to manage. Man, that this is a pressing issue, and we hear about it and talk about it often. So, Nick, we're so happy to have you on the show today. How you doing?
I'm going well, thanks, Mike, and thanks for having me, Scott.
Sure.
I must say that's quite the intro. I'm rather looking forward to what I have to say.
Yeah.
Same here. I'll start out with too. When Mike and I were talking about bringing you on, that I'm just gonna get off the bat with, I know so little about underground utilities. This is an area that is so new to me. So I am excited to hear anything you have to say, because like I don't even know the first thing about this side of stuff. I'm an above ground guy so far. So I'm really excited, because I don't think this is something we've ever touched on before.
Yeah, well, that's exciting to hear. It's not uncommon, Scott. You look outside your window or you walk on the sidewalk and it's unseen. The risk is unseen. And the one thing that we're trying to raise the visibility of is the ubiquitous nature of that risk. And there's tons and tons of evidence all around the world that says that this is a problem that can't be ignored. In the States, for example, once every 60 seconds, a utility is struck when a project has been done, an underground utility. And we're just on the crusade to make sure that that visibility is lifted and that it stops happening, because it can be prevented. A huge amount of the risk can be removed. And the way that this risk is manifested isn't just in project cost, but unfortunately impacts human lives. People get killed as a result, or so badly injured they can't go back to work. So we really do believe, we have a real passionate belief that this is a very large issue. And we're pretty excited by the position that we're in and the way we can lead change in this.
Yeah, that's great. On my end, having spent 26 years in construction, is definitely a pretty familiar territory for me, where you're always wondering what you're going to find underground. And even when they come out and do all their locates, they still don't always get it right. And, there's all these older structures that maybe don't have any ferrous materials in them, where their detectors don't pick them up, and you're hitting something, or you're finding a cesspool, or you're finding something that you're like, you're absolutely right about the human risk to human life, but just the cost to projects, and even some of these can be so impactful that it's a feasibility thing. Like, the project might not be viable anymore. So this is a really critical topic, and I'm really happy we're touching on it today.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah. Well, we're going to definitely dive deeper, but we always like to do a little fun fact at the start of our shows, just to kind of a little bit of an icebreaker, but also just bring a little bit of your culture, of your region, for folks to hear about. So we like to share something interesting about your region, or something that came out of your region that maybe had a larger impact nationally or globally. And then, of course, because we're talking about the underground world today, we could, of course, have a fun fact about something related to that as well. So, Nick, you want to kick us off with a fun fact?
Well, we think New Zealand is the coolest little country in the world. We're the most isolated country in the world. I'm sure you know about that.
Yeah.
And we're very shaky. So we sit right on the inflection point on two pretty large tectonic plates that creates a lot of geothermic problems or issues, but also opportunities in New Zealand, and earthquakes as well. I think what it means for us is that we have to do things a little bit differently. So we have an incredibly good reputation of being innovative, of being change leaders, and for a very, very small country, we do a lot of very, very cool things. Thinking right back to what Sir Edmund Hillary did, the first guy getting to the top of Mount Everest.
Yeah.
So we're lucky where we are. Our isolation causes us to be strategic in the way we solve problems, and I'm pretty proud to be part of the fabric of New Zealand's history that does that. So yeah, very cool.
Yeah. Through isolation comes resilience. I love it.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Well, Scott, you want to go next?
Yeah, I'll switch over to the since we are talking about the underground world. I have just one was just looking back. I was hiking the Palisades, actually. I hope I haven't said this one before. I was hiking the Palisades, which is a, mountainous, like probably somewhat mountainous region on the other side, the west side of the Hudson, at least for, our area.
Those are hills, Scott.
Yeah. I don't have what their height is there, but it's a pretty sheer drop down to the Hudson, I will say. Like it's, but that was caused by, a glacier moving through, and we had, 200 million years ago, glacier moved through, compressed all that bedrock and shifted it over. And that's kind of also part of why, as I understand it, why Manhattan sits on really, really, really hard bedrock. One of the reasons that they can do all the super tall buildings in New York and why it's so big is we've got the bedrock and the luxury. And, I always find it fascinating how much easier foundation work is in New York City for super tall buildings compared to elsewhere, because you don't have to go as deep because you have that strong bedrock to work in. So that's a fun
schist. One. I think it's a schist.
Yeah, I think you are correct, bedrock. Right? Yeah,
I was a geology major just for
a
wee little bit in college before I shifted over to construction.
I brought up the right one then, the right fun fact.
Yeah. Well, what's amazing about that is if you think about all these tall buildings and all that solid bedrock, but then you have all these underground utilities. Like just thinking about this underground world, if you've seen some of those shows like on the History Channel, like Modern Marvels, and they showed some of those underground projects they did for the subways, and they just did these 3D like conceptualized things underground of what we think is under there. And this was like 10, 20 years ago, where there was just an artist like drawing this out, right? Like maybe doing some basic computer stuff without saying like, well, this is actually where it is. So that's a pretty, man, New York, it's crazy. From a logistics standpoint. So, okay. So
it's also a very cool city. I love visiting it.
Yeah, it is. I'm amazed that you just sit there and observe what happens on a day-to-day in New York. You're like, how is this city like operate? It's crazy.
If I could guess, I think the chaos under the street probably matches above. It's just, like, I'm sure it's a mess down there.
Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting point you make, Scott. It's obviously, one of the older cities. The Eastern Seaboard's, older than the Western Seaboard. So the complexity and the density of utilities over there is very different to the western side of the United States, and then it's very different again right through the middle. With age becomes, it brings challenges. It's as you were saying earlier, Scott, or might have been you, Mike. It's hard to measure some of the way that these utilities are built, and there's no records of them. So there's risk that sits underneath, and often that translates to risk that sits on top as well. And getting those two mesh together is a really interesting problem to solve.
Yeah, definitely. Can't wait to dive in more. So I want to share real quick my fun fact, because this was something that I actually learned how to do a few years ago. And I don't know if this is a term in New Zealand, water witching. Is that something you're familiar with?
Is that when you have a stick and I think we call it water divining, but there's no shortage of water in New Zealand. Like, we're an island in the middle of nowhere. It rains more than we see blue sky, but I understand the term.
Okay, all right. So we had a project I was working on a few years back, and there was some questions about the location of a particular utility, and the city engineers had it shown in one place on their GIS system, but we weren't finding it there. So we called the locates out, and they had all the their equipment where they were trying to pick up a signal, and they were just struggling to find it. So the guy pulls out a copper wire. He's like, okay, we're going to do this the old-fashioned way. So it was just like a really heavy gauge copper wire, probably like a 6/8 gauge copper wire, and he bent it in an L shape, and he held it in one hand. I know people can't see us, but I'm demonstrating here. So he took the copper wire and he spins it in his hand for like 30 seconds. And then he goes over to where he thinks the utility is. And then and he just holds it really loosely in his hand. And then the copper wire will kind of start to gravitate towards where there's some electrical difference in what's happening in the ground. And he essentially found the pipe that way. And then we later confirmed it with a scope in a sewer that's exactly where it was. But I was like, oh, I got to try this. So I was able to actually recreate what he did, but then he took it a step further. He's like, okay, if you stomp your foot on the ground once, the wire would like tilt off camber and then it would come back. And he's like, okay, it's more than 1 foot deep. He stomped his foot twice really hard, and the wire would move twice, like off camber and then back off again twice. He's like, it's more than 2 feet. And he did it till he got like 4 or 5 stomps on the ground and it stopped. And he's like, okay, your pipe's here and it's 5 feet deep. And sure enough, he was like within inches of where it was. So
how cool is that?
It's amazing. It's amazing. And I was like, okay, what's going on here? But there's just some really old knowledge out there and just ways of doing things that I think is so fascinating. So
it is fascinating, Mike. But the other part of that is, with strongly held beliefs or, normalized thinking, innovation starts to get squashed and squandered a little bit. The notion just because we've always done something some way means that we have to always keep doing it.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if I'm going to chat to the team around bringing water debining or water witching back into our processes. But one of the main challenges we see globally is the fact that the workflow in regards to construction or maintenance is set. It's a pretty solid workflow. And the notion of de-risking that workflow up front through different tools and different capture and management of data can sometimes be difficult to get people to think differently on.
Yeah.
So I think that story is so topical, and I'm looking forward to seeing how our team adopt it.
Well, I can imagine being on $1 billion project and someone's out there stomping their feet, twisting wires around to locate critical infrastructure underground.
The contractors will love to see that one, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So New Zealand, we talked about this a little bit with our last guest too, because we see a lot of geospatial technology. It seems like that part of the world, there's a lot of innovation coming out of that region. Both in Australia and New Zealand, because I know several other firms in New Zealand too that are focused on the kind of geospatial innovation. So why do you think that is?
I think it comes back to the fun fact about New Zealand is isolation brings resilience, and we're prepared to test and learn and get things wrong so that we can improve things over time. The founder of Reveal, a gentleman called Sam Whiffen, who's still very much involved in the business. He was a real pioneer in this space. He could see the way that he came from the trenches. He had boots with mud on. He was really on the ground, understanding and seeing where these challenges sat. And he kept seeing the same organisations doing the same thing, expecting a different result, and had a firm belief that actually we can get ahead of it, and if we can capture that data in a more enduring way and make sure that asset is something that is, the data becomes an asset that is managed over time, then over time the workflow improves and risks are reduced. So why not try different ways in solving it? And really the notion of what Reveal does now is moving the location of utilities from spray paint on the ground into a logical metaphorical spray paint in the cloud. And what's really cool is the amalgamation of that different data, Mike. So, we've got LiDAR data that we combine with the different levels of quality data, and it creates a real holistic view of risk. And the outcome has been a significant reduction in risk for many, many entities. So going back to the shaky isles nature of New Zealand, you talk about, the very rigid, strong geography that New York is built on. Wellington, where I'm dialing in from, the capital city of New Zealand, is literally built on a fault line. The whole city is built on reclaimed land. There's nothing really underneath it. It had to be created by innovation.
Right.
So the way that the buildings are built here are very, very deep. We've actually got many of the newer ones, large rubber feet that absorb the different movements from earthquakes, so that we can continue to live. It's humans are great at adapting, and they're great at solving problems and using innovation to do it.
Yeah, here in the Pacific Northwest, we're no strangers to shaky ground either. There's the big one, that is anticipated here that people are kind of freaked out about. So, although unfortunately for us, I think that the whole Pacific Northwest region didn't really know about this major earthquake potential until, fairly recently. So there was, lots of, I think there was a geologist who discovered some deposits like way upland from some large tsunamis that were caused by some of these in the past. So yeah, it's a kind of fairly recent knowledge for this area. So a lot of the buildings are not up to snuff. So that's a challenge, and utilities for that matter. I mean, that's
right.
a challenge that they're trying to tackle quickly. I know somebody who worked in the emergency, or I guess the resiliency bureau for the city. And they're like, for the city of Portland, they're like, yeah, when that hits, we're probably not going to have water for at least 3 months, at least. Wow. Yeah. And that's that's serious. Like that's.
Well, from a humanitarian point of view, things start to get pretty shaky pretty quickly. Yeah. We rely on water. We know water is a very scarce resource, and it's getting scarcer and scarcer. We won't go down that particular route, but the world's really challenged with fresh drinking water. So that resilience of the city becomes even more important. So the knowledge of where it is, the age of that infrastructure, and the condition of it, and a pretty rigid risk-based, evidence-based maintenance program should 100% be invested in by that municipality to make sure that it stays as resilient as possible. So disruption to human life is minimized.
Yeah. Well, I think we're really touching on just scratching the surface on the magnitude of this, this issue. Can you maybe just lay the foundation for just the magnitude of all of what we're talking about? Like, what are the issues and the opportunities associated with those issues?
I think we've talked about the issues already, and I do like your pun of scratching the surface as we're talking about things that lie underneath. So well done there, Mike.
Yeah.
But globally, we're talking about billions and billions of dollars of cost to country, to asset owners. It's significant, and that cost is generated by the impact of what it costs to repair a utility that wasn't expected to be hit, and also the echo effect costs. So things like brand costs, public disruption, traffic management, where you have to close roads down to get it sorted out. And we can't take an eye off the humanitarian costs. If someone puts a digger through an 11 kV line or a gas line, or 11 kV, a gas line and a water main that are all close together, you're talking a serious explosion that's going to have large ripple effects. Yeah. And unfortunately, we've seen that globally, but those events have actually happened. So, we hope the world is starting to wake up a bit more in regards to the challenges, and there is a tipping point that's starting to come. And more organizations are starting to measure the impact or the ROI or the payback on making sure that risk is baked into workflow. We did a recent study with a pretty large public transportation project in a densely urban area in this part of the world. The chairman of that project talked about the fact that it was not really a roading project at all. It ended up being a utility relocation project. You think about if you widen a road and deepen a road, what that does to things like water, gas, sewage, electricity. It has such a huge ripple effect. And by understanding where it was, truly understanding where it was, not just going off that as-built existing line that's lacking in evidence and lacking in confidence and accuracy, and layering all the different quality levels of data on top of each other, you get a really good picture of what that looks like. And their success story was really, really positive. We've just concluded a piece of work for one of our partners in the US for one of the large transportation organization on some roading infrastructure. They used multi-channel GPR and drove at road speed just to get an understanding of what the risk would look like based on how we could interpret that information through our proprietary data processing capabilities and AI. And it yielded such a huge amount of risk, such a huge amount of unknown risk that it actually changed the way that they've gone about the whole design process. Wow. So, yeah, it's significant. Everything from understanding the thickness of pavement the permutation of paint, which would suggest there's either leakage on top or leakage underneath, as well as the infrastructure risk. There's real return on value to be had.
Cool. So making another foundation pun here. So just to maybe start the beginning a bit for our listeners. So, okay, so I'm an engineer, I'm a contractor, I'm trying to locate utilities, right? What's the current way that I would do that? Why is that not working? What were the current options? And then I guess how is Reveal changing that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Scott. So the notion of as-built is what most engineers would rely on to start the design process. Now, an as-built is when a utility owner, let's say it's a gas company or a water owner, electricity, whatever it might be, they will draw. It might be on a PDF. It might also be a hand drawing on a piece of paper. They will draw or mark out either digitally or on physical paper where they believe that asset sits. Now, sometimes that drawing of that asset isn't done at all. So the infrastructure is laid, and because of time or changes to someone's day or whatever, it just didn't quite get done. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is when it is done, it's not done accurately. So I might finish putting infrastructure in the ground. I might be tired, and I might say, roughly it's down the side of the street here, and it's pretty much in a straight line. That will do. And when a large infrastructure project starts, or private asset owner, and we should touch on that as well, they'll ask an engineering firm or a designer to get as much of that information together that they can find and try and create some sort of view on where that infrastructure sits. But they're making decisions based on assumed data. So poor decisions made on poor data just creates a really bad outcome. I will never forget one of the quotes that one of our customers said when I very first started here at Reveal. We talked about the fact that as-builts can be anywhere between 60 and 64% captured, and as low as 25% geospatially accurate. So actually where you believe it to be. And the customer was so astute. He said, "Well, that's 100% useless. You can't construct around that." And I'll never forget it. Yeah, it was really insightful for me.
Having spent a lot of time in that world, the as-builts are usually the last thing that's being requested from the client or the contractor, and contracts are winding down. People have, maybe they've been paid most of their contract and they're holding some retainage till they get these final deliverables. But it is this tedious thing that is absolutely critical. But as you pointed out, Nick, I think the level of attention and detail that gets put into these things isn't what it should be. So it's okay, you're doing all these things in hindsight as opposed to maybe in real time when these things are being laid. I know that, here, if you're putting sewer utilities in, they're definitely taking invert shots when they're placing the pipe. They get it bedded, they inspect it. So all of those invert elevations are required by, your municipality, but it's okay, there's just so much more to see that's related to that utility. And it just seems to me with today's technology that there shouldn't be any reason that, and I'll bring this up because I've mentioned it a few times throughout this podcast. Last summer, they were replacing the sewers out in our street right outside my house. And it went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And, they had all these trenches, the streets, just the belly of the streets were wide open. They were 8 to 15 feet down into the middle of the streets. And I went out and talked to the folks because I'm hey, I got a drone here. I could start capturing some of these as-built. And I'm are you capturing this information as you're putting the pipes in? He's no, we're not doing that. And it just seems even with iPhones today and LiDAR scanners on iPhones,
Exactly right.
I think we're kind of talking future forward, but going back to what you were saying, Nick, just the level of as-builts, I think we're kind of speaking of this in a sense that we recently put this in, but there's stuff that's in the ground from 100, 200, sewer systems. And I'm thinking Rome or something where you have sewer systems that are hundreds and hundreds of years old that are possibly still and being used. Like, man,
it is nuts, isn't it? When you think about it, just the age of what could be there. And, we're passionate about heritage status as well. So,
Right.
think about things where Indigenous people lived, and that needs to be protected. That might not be known about. It all starts to meld together in like a really a big issue of risk. And for us, we just think that risk profile can be significantly reduced. So I'm really careful not to use the word completely gone, because there's always going to be risk there. But the amount of risk that you accept is, can certainly drop. And you said before, Mike, why isn't that infrastructure being recorded? It's a future state. Well, it's not. Like, the future is here. We've got organizations around the world, and we're doing this as well, using photogrammetry from a basic everyday iPhone or smartphone, and using that data, which, by the way, is the best type of data you can get, geo-referenced, GPS-based, actual physical evidence or visibility of the infrastructure, and then permanently housed and hosted in the cloud, so it's never ever lost again.
Right.
It enables so many things. It enables conflict analysis. How does that infrastructure relate to other infrastructure?
Yeah.
What happens in 100 years' time when the city continues to grow and more capacity is needed? What's the best way of doing it? Is it to add, or is it to do it a different way? Just solves so many problems if you capture it properly.
Yeah, agreed. And I don't know how many times you think you have everything you need, and then you bury a trench or you put it all back, and it's like, oh, well, it would have been nice if we had this or that, and if you scan it, then it's all there, right? I don't know, but not all utilities are open trench operations either. So there's, there's boring operations where you're directional boring utilities. So there's just a lot of ways that these things are going into underground. So how to capture those? I know we have a section that we want to get into more of the tools of the trade, so to speak, of like how this data is being collected today. But it's just the scale of this conversation is, when you think about everything underground and things being dilapidated, and like just the impact they can have on communities and cities when they start to fail. Like, it's because there's I lived in Atlanta, Georgia for a while, and the company I worked for, one of the branches of the company, they had a lightweight concrete division that they did lightweight roofs, but they also did they would pump lightweight concrete around, like they would tunnel bore, like the large tunnel boring machines, and then it kind of leaves a little bit of a jagged structure, and then they would sleeve it, and then the gap between the sleeve and where the rock was, they would pump this lightweight concrete and fill those voids, so you had like a nice consistent structure without any gaps. So we had the pleasure of going down into, it was major project where, I mean, I don't want to be like, the fish was this big, but the diameter of this tunnel was, 20 feet. Like, it was massive. And they had this huge hole with this crane, and we all loaded up in this bird cage, and the crane lifted us up in this cage, dropped us like 100 feet down underground. And then we had to like get training on all the respirators for the air quality and this and that. And then we were like driving cars down through these tunnels, and then taking these little journeys down these branches and seeing the work that we were doing. And it was just fascinating for one, that this massive piece of infrastructure was underground, but then just the logistics and all that went into it. So, this was, this was probably late 90s, early 2000s. So I don't know if they were capturing LiDAR data at that point of those types of things. So it's like, how was that captured? It's really
great question.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So before we jump into technology, you had brought it up, Nick, private locating, right? Like getting a private utility locator. How does it work in New Zealand? Here, we have 811, which is like call before you dig. And I've heard both sides. I've heard people say like, get the public utility locator, that's enough. And then people saying, no, I need to get one private or whatever. And how does that work in New Zealand? And is Reveal Is it for both? Is it whether you're doing a public utility locate or a private locator can use it?
Yeah, this is a nuanced question, Scott. So I got to be really careful what I say here.
Oh, good.
Look, that service,
Not that.
that service, that 1-1 service, or the dial before you dig service, like it is an essential service, and it's a very, very good one. Depending on the state in the US or different parts of other parts of the world, what typically happens is that you'll call the 811 or the dial before you dig service, and they'll say, look, we'll send the records out that we have. And if they don't have records, then a utility locator will come out and mark. But each individual asset owner, so the gas team and then the water team and then the electricity team, will send one person out for each of their own locators. So it's really right there. There's a huge improvement in workflow opportunity.
Yeah.
And if we take a step back, and hopefully we'll get onto this a little bit in regards to what Australia are doing, and what Mel Greenall is leading with Before You Dig Australia, is the time and effort that it takes for an organisation or a person to pull all these PDFs together from all the different asset owners across a region is really, really cumbersome. Like we're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours. And often there is unfortunately evidence that the process is asked, but the data isn't used in the design because it's cumbersome. So that's a problem that we've solved for as well. Our tech and digital team have done a really good job at being able to interpret digitally what's on a PDF and georeference on the map at speed, so that baseline knowledge of risk is there already. So I realise I'm going off at a tangent, but that PDF processing piece is a big area to start with. The difference between the asset owner locator and the private locator, or someone like a Reveal or a SAM in the US, is that if your scope gives you the remit to do more. So when we're asked to go out and locate utilities for either a government entity that's doing a project or a private asset site like a port or an airport, then we can scan and capture all of the data for all of the assets and mark that out, survey it, and put it into the cloud that they can then manage it in an enduring way. When you have the individual asset owners come out, the delay can be a long time. We also are very proud at the level of training that we put our people through and the quality of output. In this part of the world, it's a unregulated industry, so you don't actually have to have a qualification to go out and say that you've marked something. I'm fairly certain in some parts of the US is the same. We know that's the case in parts of Europe as well, and that just continues to add more risk. If you've got a water diviner stomping his foot, like Mike just talked about, and he's got it wrong by a foot, but we're saying that we've actually, we're the experts and we do it and we get it wrong by a foot, then that's just not good enough. So the way we reduce that risk is by using a range of different techniques to reduce the chance that error will be created.
Are you working with surveyors to complement that accuracy or to improve? Because I know, thinking about the profession of accuracy, I mean, surveyors are just that. So they're the licensed professionals who are obtaining this vital, super accurate information. So I imagine, that here in the States, that can be applied to vertical structures too. Like there's surveyors doing interior scans now where there's control that's established up a high-rise building or what have you. So is there akin to that? Is that also happening in the underground world? And is there a partnership or relationship there?
Yeah, absolutely. We have surveying capability within the Reveal Services business as well. So we 100% do that today in New Zealand, and globally, because we're the future of our business is on the technology, on the platform, on utility data management, the risk management. We're agnostic to the way the data is captured. So we'll bring in the located data, the survey data, the scan data, things like LiDAR, drone, CCTV footage, even sonics. All of that can be melded together to create what we call the unified utility model, which is the most confident view of where the utility is based on evidence and gives you the full provenance on it. So yes, is the short answer. That long answer was just so you had a bit more context around how that different data is used to create that single source of truth.
Yeah. speaking of just big data, we're in the world of big data, right? Like, I mean, I guess that term can be used in different ways, but just your comment on, you have all of this information and all these different types of data, whether it's PDFs or what have you, the information's there, but it's not easily digestible, and therefore it won't get used. I mean, it really does take this distillation of that information and bring it forward in a way that's really easy to use and comprehend, and it gives you that return on investment and that value. Because it's a pretty common topic now, just with LiDAR data, how much information you're getting from a LiDAR scan, where maybe they don't need all of those points, but you have them. So how do we make the most out of them? And how, and AI is playing a part in that, and all the analysis that's coming out of that. So just, I really like what I heard there, just about how you're distilling all of that at Reveal.
That's right. And we're using algorithms and machines to make that interpretation, because it gives scale and confidence, and it reduces the cost. I think some organizations and entities are perhaps, or quite frankly, afraid of investing in the risk profile before they start construction. Yet globally, I mean, get this for a number, 99% of projects run over time or over budget. And if a simple insurance play up front means that will happen a little bit less, it's bonkers, right?
It is. Yeah.
So first of all, that was a really great nuanced answer to my nuanced question. So that was excellent. Talking about like all these different technologies, right? It sounds like this is like a big layer cake of a lot of different things coming together. Like you said, sometimes that can be really scattered, and then through Reveal, it's now all together. Like, is there a preference? Like, you have LiDAR data, you have a surveyor, you have this, you have that. Is there like an order of like who captures what that you prefer? Like, is LiDAR data better than, like you said, like a sonic method? Like, what's that kind of, is there a hierarchy of, this is in a perfect world how everyone would grab this data, but this is maybe more affordable or more cheaper, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Let me just start by saying all data is good. If people are using data to make decisions, then that's, we're starting off on the right foot. We often talk about the 4 different layers of quality of data. There's quality level D data, which is those sort of ropey as-builts that I talked about before. And it goes QLC, which is inferred or aerial imagery, QLB, which are things like GPR, or you might see people out with a wand, they're doing EML work, and QLA. QLA is what Mike touched on before. I could have a drone or a photogram device and take evidence of where the utility is laid. Now that is the best, that's the gold standard. But all of it is important, because that stretch of road that Mike just talked about earlier in the podcast around where that water utility is being laid, that'll have a certain area of project. It might be the whole street, it might be the whole suburb, but there'll be a start and end to that project. Before that, there'll be other data. So being able to mesh that data together to create that linearity and that confidence around provenance is really important. So I know that doesn't answer your question, Scott. And yes, the whole world should absolutely take LiDAR and photogrammetry of when new infrastructure, whatever it is laid. But you've got to start somewhere, and it has to build over time. So that's why we're strong believers in leveraging all available data and using processes and systems and artificial intelligence to pull them together to create what that system of record actually really looks like.
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So
cool.
what are?
I'm glad I'm saying something that makes sense.
No, you explained that so perfectly. And when you said the provenance, that made perfect sense to me. Of like, yeah, this data comes from different places, and there's some rankings to that. But I think knowing that is probably half the battle, right? That it came from someone saw it, they actually captured it, or it's inferred. So it's got a different kind of quality ranking to it.
Well, since we are a geospatial podcast and we are talking about the technology used, I know, so we've touched on photogrammetry, we've touched on LiDAR, you mentioned ground penetrating radar. So are those, and then there's as-built drawings. So I'm just thinking the tools of the trade, we were just talking about, is there a ranking, but what are the actual tools? Because maybe some of our listeners don't really know how some of this information is being collected, because even into the wastewater, like larger diameter pipes, they're sending robotic crawlers and floats and all kinds of things down these pipes. So maybe the list might be too big, but is there just like the core technology that makes this possible, or have we touched them all, or do you want to highlight some of those?
No, I think you've touched on the ones that are used like all around the world and are rather ubiquitous.
Mm-hmm.
And the two other areas that we incorporate into the data management piece, so where we put into under Matt's platform, are chamber scans as well, which again are photogrammetry, but that gives you the confidence around the health of a chamber, what else might be in the chamber. So things like telecommunication ducts. Are they at capacity? Are they damaged? Are there spare telecommunication ducts? Can they be leveraged for future hauls, for example? And potholing data. So when someone uses a hydrovac machine and actually digs a hole on top of where the utility is located, that adds to that quality level A data that we talked about as well. Now, where that sometimes gets a bit complicated is people could go out and pothole based on the assumption of where they think something is, and it's not there. They might miss that by 1 millimeter and believe that piece of infrastructure is not there, and then do some construction and whammo, you've got another problem on your hands. So it's really about combining those different techniques, and experience and expertise will yield what is the best way to do that. Unfortunately, scope and cost sometimes determines how it's done. But we are going to keep pushing that notion that almost no matter what you spend up front, you're going to guarantee a return on the back end. And again, that's ubiquitous.
Yeah. Speaking of scope and cost, just the investment in this process. I've talked to asset managers where once they're in the O&M phase, they don't have the budgets to implement some of these things, or they're like, yeah, that's awesome, we would love to have that, but we can't afford it, it's not in our budget, as opposed to getting in front of that and getting this implemented during the construction phase. Just from that scope and cost side of things, how do you, are you seeing the same issue where you have a lot of existing asset owners that it's very difficult to get a foot in the door, or are you finding successes in demonstrating that return on investment where it's like, okay, here's how this is going to help you, even though you have an existing asset? Because then we're into more of that inspection world as opposed to, identifying for maybe some collaboration or coordination on some other front. But just like, what is the ideal situation as far as how this gets implemented into a project at the various phases that it might be in, whether it's existing or new or what have you?
It's such a familiar problem, and it's why I touched on workflow at the start, Mike. So organizations need to make the change that ahead of the design stage, let's do some work to de-risk the design. So that should be embedded in the workflow. And I'm pleased to say those organizations that do that are getting really good results.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say there's not value to be yielded through construction. That example I talked about earlier with the 508% ROI, we're actually engaged midway through construction, but in some senses, the horse had already bolted. They'd been making decision on infrastructure, as-built data, and it caused a huge amount of delay and a huge amount of extra cost. So we haven't seen evidence really ever of the work not yielding a return, but the most confident way to get that return done, whether it's done by Reveal or anyone else, it doesn't matter, but it's to be done ahead of the designs. It's in the pre-design process.
Yeah, I mean, having worked for a fully integrated design build firm, like obviously huge advocates of all of that work you could do on the front end pays huge dividends through the project from just an overall coordination standpoint.
Yeah, my hope is that these engineering consulting organizations lean into and adopt it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they're in a really compromised position. They have to bid for large pieces of work. It's often always price driven. So they kind of start to take things out of their bid response or their tender response, which drops the price out. And to give them some confidence, they tag out of where the risk may or may not sit. Now, if that conversation can be a more collaborative one and say, look, we can reduce the amount of variations and we can deliver more on time and more on budget, it will actually cost you less. And it means that we, as the engineering and consulting entity, can do more for others. Mm-hmm. It really is a situation of a rising tide would lift all ships in this one. It's so obvious. But again, it comes back to workflow and it comes back to people that want to be innovative and drive change.
I think it comes a little bit down to cultural differences on contracting too. Like I know in Germany, they don't go off the low bidder. They will throw out, like government work, you throw out the low bid and the high bid, and that disincentivizes the low bid kind of mentality that is pretty prevalent here in the States, where I even think that it might be a requirement that if it's a bona fide bid, that a government agency has to select the low bidder. So it's because it's, obviously we're using tax dollars and all these things. So there's some famous quote. I can't remember who the president was. They're standing on the Hoover Dam. They're like, you're standing on holding back all this water on a mountain of the lowest bidders. And you're like, okay. So
you better get off that thing.
Yeah. It's really, I feel like this is cultural, like baked into the way of doing business in certain countries. Do you see those differences in adoption of, or I guess an openness to implementing this earlier? Or, do you see those differences?
It's changing. It's changing even within the 18 months that I've been here. And, I'm kind of standing on the shoulders of giants here. There's been people driving change at Reveal for 14 years. I've touched on our founder before, but it's been difficult. It's been a really slow slog globally to get people to think about this in a different sense.
Yeah.
But even in the short time I've been here, we've seen change. We've seen people adopt the notion that if we take the same approach to a capital work or maintenance program and don't change it at all, it's bonkers to think that we're going to be able to run it at a cheaper, more effective, more efficient way. Because the cost of everything's going up. The cost of people's time, the cost of people's, risk profile, the cost of, the goods to do the construction themselves, that's all going up. But there's one obvious way that you can reduce that, and that's by ensuring that you give yourself every chance to do it on time and on budget. I think the size of the construction often has an impact too, gents. So I'm thinking to a large airport we did work for, not in this region, but another one. But they had a pretty predictable and consistent capital budget. And then they released what they call the 2040 plan. I think everyone has a 2040 plan, but it's a large capital works where the region is experiencing serious growth. So the capacity of the airport needs to be maintained and improved. And that's lifted the capital budget for them. And they said, well, if we're doing this much more, and if we keep operating like we currently do, then the blowouts are going to be significant to the point that we're actually never going to deliver this work. So now is the time to scan, to capture, to meld all that information together, all the previous information, what we've got now, and then have it in an enduring way. So we never have to go through that end-to-end process again, but we have confidence around where the risk sits going forward. That's a really good example of what is the motivator or the drive to do something different.
Yeah. I see a lot of parallels in this. I work a lot in the architecture world, and I see a lot of parallels with BIM with this, because this exactly, like, I don't think BIM really didn't take off, at least in New York City, until the city of New York. Like, if you're doing a New York City Department of Design and Construction funded project, you have to provide a BIM model. And I think, at least here in New York, it's like when the city made that decision, everything started going that way. I saw it in the last 10 years here, from BIM being something that felt too fancy, too much money, like, oh, that's cute, but and maybe we can do pretty models, but like it's not worth our time, to now like you're left in the dust if you're not providing that stuff, you're behind. So I think hopefully there's the right motivators in place in some of these cities that will pretty much put that requirement in there.
Yeah,
it's such a good example, Scott, that someone's seen and taken a step back and gone, it's nuts that we're doing it this way. So what's a type of technology that we can adopt that reduces that risk? Yeah. And that tipping point happens. The municipality of New York says that's the way forward, and everyone changes their workflow for the better. That's the same for the underground. Unfortunately, BIM doesn't quite work for the underground, but it's the same approach.
Yeah, and that's kind of like, I mean, for lack of better, it's like a policy decision made at a level where people just you don't have the option. And I think that, for private businesses to come along and just make some of these decisions on their own, I mean, there's risk assessments that are being done, but it's always helpful if you have this outside influence that's taking a proven method, a proven technology, something that is working, and write it into the spec. Or if it's the designers, they're like, hey, let's write this service into the specification. I'm actually trying to get that done for drone work too. It's like, you should have a drone scan of a building required at certain, stops along the way, because I know the return on investment is there. And when other people see it, so it's, of course I'm selling the service, but I also strongly believe in it just because I've seen it. So like getting in early with the folks that are having the biggest influence on, this being adopted, which kind of leads me to ask, like, who are your primary client types? So, like, are you working for municipalities? Is it private? Is just like, is there, I'm sure it's a spread, but where do you see most of your clientele coming in from?
It's all of the above. It's typically those that are yielding, also driving larger infrastructure projects or larger maintenance programs, but they can be both municipalities or government or private asset sites.
Yeah. Is it usually reserved? Is it usually reserved for larger, like high value type assets as well, where they're like, we're putting in a bunch of 8-inch sewer down these, surface streets all around the city. We're not too worried about those, but they're dealing with a much larger, more critical piece of infrastructure. Then, obviously that the dollar value goes up, and I guess the implications of something going wrong or needing that documented well. Do you see that, or I hear what you're saying about this threshold of like size, but to me, it just seems like the technology is getting to a point where it's maybe it's not so cumbersome to go out, and when they are laying that 8-inch sewer in the ground, just capture it. Then you have it.
That's right. Yeah. I hope I haven't misled around the quantum in regards to a project to deliver the de-risking of the asset by, locating it, and then the enduring management of the asset going forward, because it really does apply to, any. It's just that the consequences of getting it wrong for a larger project is much bigger.
Yeah.
So therefore contingency blows out and time frame blows out, et cetera, et cetera. Probably, I haven't got the numbers in front of me, but it's the private asset sites that don't have the luxury of being able to use the likes of 811 or Before You Dig, because it's on their private land. They're sometimes the ones that have got a greater exposure to the risk. But if we go back to what we talked about at the top of the call, and the fact that those as-built information captured that is disseminated by the likes of 811 and Before You Dig, because that is so patchy, the impact is very similar. So the problem statement remains the same, and the opportunity for improvement remains the same, no matter if it's at a municipality level, at a national level, and adoption level. And we should talk about Australia, Before You Dig Australia on that one, or on an infrastructure site perspective as well. The other lens of risk to think about is operational continuity. Would a port or an airport, for example, accept the fact that they might have to shut down for a day if a utility was struck? And I bet your bottom dollar, I guarantee, because I know this, the answer to that is no, because the cost is so high and the brand impact is so high, and these places are incredibly competitive. So operational continuity is a really large factor in this.
Yeah. Well, where do you feel like that there are gaps in the perceived value of the service?
And that's a really good question. I think the biggest gap is knowledge. Knowledge that a different approach can be employed, and it's not that difficult to improve the risk profile, therefore reduce what the impact in regards to cost, time, human lives will be. I really do think that. Now, I'm still surprised at the conversations I'm having with people where they say, I've never realized this was a thing. I didn't think you could digitize existing PDFs or hand-drawn drawings and merge it with LiDAR data or drone data or photogrammetry and create that problem. I just didn't even think that was a thing. We just slam everything in GIS and that's it.
Yeah.
And for some people, that's enough. Like, it's enough of a visibility of risk. But it's when you need the depth and the breadth of that risk profile to be truly understood that it's not. So, yeah, I think the knowledge is the biggest piece, Mike.
Yeah. Knowing is half the battle, right? I mean, we see that in the drone side too. It's like once people realize it's possible, they're very likely to buy in, but convincing them or showing them that it's possible is half the battle.
Lots of educating.
That's right. Yeah. But it's a fun battle to have, isn't it? Because
exactly.
When you know the value's there, then it's just typically a good conversation to have.
It's easy.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not easy, but
I would say quite easy, Mike.
Easier than the old way.
Yeah.
I did want to get to before you dig Australia and dig a little in another pun, dig a little into that. We're chock full of this one. Could you explain a little like how that partnership came about? What that's about? Like what are you doing in that regard?
So we were targeting organizations with digitizing existing records. I talked before about just how cumbersome and time consuming and difficult it is to pull all these different records together and geo-reference them and use that as a baseline to start design. And luckily, and part of it is luck, as we all know, selling and growth can often be, the CEO Before You Dig Australia also saw that it was bonkers, that the process that they were going through hadn't changed. It hadn't actually fundamentally changed since the Before You Dig Australia entity had been created in way back in 1984. Very, very important process that they're delivering, but essentially there's a dial and a receipt of PDFs or hand-drawn drawings. So Mel had come across us. I think we're at a conference. We'd also had a couple of marketing programs out in the wild around digitizing existing records because we know how hard it is. She said, you know what, this is something we're trying to solve for. Let's discuss how this could come to life. And it started off doing a small proof of concept in a very dense area in the CBD of Sydney, another very cool city like New York. And the challenge was, in this area, how quickly can you digitize the existing records? And they knew what their base rate was, and we blew it out of the water. We used our proprietary data processing capability and automation to do it. It was essentially a 10x improvement in speed.
Wow.
And then there was the and piece. It was you've got the platform in which we can view it as well, so we don't have to do any of that referral process, the traditional referral process. Let's have a look at what that looks like. And Mel's done a really good job at being methodical in regards to how change might be adopted and how change might be rejected. So it's a very staged rollout in how it's going to work. And she's sought feedback from people with good industry knowledge and good experience. And the feedback's been fantastic. Yes, I would rather be able to sit on my laptop or my PC and draw a polygon, a region of the area, and have that information immediately presented to me, as opposed to waiting for these PDFs coming in and asking, poor old Sally or poor old John in the corner for days, sometimes literally weeks, to pull that information together. So when we talk about innovation merged with a real problem, with a service that's delivering value today, that's a really, really good example of it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I again, not to keep going back to the architecture side, but I had my former life was as an MEP engineer, and my goodness, asking 5 different people to give me 5 different as-builts, and there's always this long pole in the tent you need all of them. Until you get the last one, you're kind of not ready to start. And I can definitely appreciate the ability to just say, nope, like, yeah, draw a polygon and it's all delivered to me. That is very,
immediately.
very cool. Yeah, right.
Now, the long-term vision is very much in line with where Reveal wants to go. Ultimately, we'd love, before you dig Australia and the world to adopt, well, if you're using this information today as part of your design, and that design is part of your workflow when you're constructing, then wouldn't it be awesome if you could take a picture of what you've put in the ground and have that put back up into that digital platform?
Right.
That gives you absolute guarantee and provenance that it's there. It's 100% the vision. That is where we're skating towards, and it's achievable today.
And that's
you're kind of cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's kind of the whole concept of clash detection in BIM, right? You're able to take this underground information, bring it into a design effort, and you could perform those same analysis where you're doing clash detection with existing elements, where you need to design something that's crisscrossing or foundations that are encroaching on load pathways and things like that. Is that also happening? Like, are some of the services that you're providing in, I would imagine they're all like very CAD friendly interfaces where they just kind of exchange back and forth, where these can be brought directly into these other design programs like AutoCAD and Revit and things like that?
Yeah, we can export to that already, no problems. Integration with platform is critical for us, and we are agnostic into how the data models that we create goes into the platform of choice for our customers.
Yeah.
Clash detection isn't part of what we do today, but the data enables you to do that clash detection because we're not the designers, and there's some really cool products out there like Rividso that do clash detection today.
Right.
But the critical part of it is the information that you need to infer that clash detection. And again, going back to those different quality levels of data, the provenance around where that utility came from and what it looks like today is absolutely essential for that clash detection to work effectively.
Where this sounds very different from BIM is what you were saying, that it almost sounds like, if I have this right, like this crowdsourcing element to it of once you're working on a project, you contribute back to the model there, because BIM is kind of like, it's a project by project thing. But what you're talking about sounds a lot more persistent. It's like you're actually adding back to the record what you've put in, once you've gotten the data.
You've absolutely nailed it, Scott. That is the vision. And again, it's not a massive leap to make. It is happening in pockets today. And that's where we believe the whole world will benefit from risk going forward.
Yeah, and that would take private owners like releasing their data. That might be, because I think there could be people that's like, well, that's our data. We own that. We don't want that to be publicly available or in some sort of cohesive model that helps the greater good, so to speak. Do you see some resistance to that?
When you say private owner, what are you referring to there, Mike?
Well, I guess if you're an architect and you design a building for an owner, they technically own the plans, right? Like the architect retains, but they have, lots of different legal language on like ownership of that product. So if people are collecting this data and it's underground, I'm almost thinking like the sky. Like nobody really, the FAA here in the States owns the sky. So it's like the underground, even though it's crossing property lines, like where does that property line physically, like how deep does it go, and where is the value for the broader community or city or municipality on having that data be democratized, so that we understand that your building sits atop all of these utilities, but we need that information because it's benefiting the greater good. So like just from a legal standpoint, like how the ownership of that data and how maybe that is shared or not shared.
Yeah. Nick, you're the expert here, but I kind of do a little counterpoint here coming on the MEP side of things, because I actually think that demarcation might be easier to make than you might think, because it's a pretty, at least here in the US, it's a fairly black and white line between where the public utility ends and then the private extension into the building begins.
With the easements, right? Like that's
right.
Yeah.
Like, perfect example. I'll give a real quick one. We had issues with the water main just in my house here, and it was a issue. I'll tell you that the public water company is really good at like being like, nope, we dug it up. There's our water valve, and anything beyond that, that's your problem. So, we actually, I was like literally looking physically at the point of where, our responsibility kind of privately starts and the public one ends. So is it correct to say, Nick, that you're going after, I guess, the public, like that side of what is available to everyone there? And maybe there aren't too many issues of ownership, but you're right. The next level is, well, what about that connection from the public into the private one? I mean, I'm sure you have aspirations of handling that too, but maybe that's a different beast to handle.
Yeah. So the reason why I asked about what the interest around a private site is they still have risk that they have to absorb too, Mike, and that data still needs to be enduring somewhere. So the notion that they've put the cables or put the pipes in the ground shouldn't just be a hand-drawn drawing somewhere. It should be in a model that actually relates and correlates and engages with the BIM on top. So the private asset owner would own that because that's theirs. But if we think back to the dial before you dig process or the 811 process, if someone's out doing a large, I don't know, highway expansion for a Department of Transport in the US, and part of that means that you're having to relocate utilities, then that is a great example of the crowdsourcing type approach that you're talking about, Scott. So it works for public sector and it works for private, where they meld together. That's it's an interesting point, but it's not where the major risk sits. The major risk sits where the construction actually happens.
Yeah, I actually have a very specific example of where this is happening. I was working on a project doing some GIS work where a large senior living campus was doing a bunch of resiliency measures for their campus and looking at like micro grids for electric and just all kinds of things. So they actually, all of their underground utilities used to be part of the district that they were in, part of the municipal systems. And then they started buying up land and building, and then they privatized all of those utilities. So the entirety, like I know there's this threshold. It's like you get to the water meter, you get to the gas meter, and then from that meter to your person, your private residence, those are private utilities. So I understand that, but in this case, it's like, okay, well, they privatize all these utilities. Maybe there's some scenario down the road where it's like, we can't afford to maintain these utilities anymore, or we're not interested. Can we give these back to the municipality? And what is, sounds complicated and awfully messy to me, but it's like, well, you've built a ton of stuff since we last saw that. Have you been tracking this? Do you know what's underground?
Exactly right.
What's the, how do we know what we're managing at this point and the age of these things and the quality of the valves you put in? Like, just there's so many aspects of this that I feel like land changes hands, buildings change hands, like the value of that information somehow being like democratized in a sense that it's there for future benefit.
Yeah, I love the idea of that. I mean, practically it's not difficult if the information is captured. As we're saying, it can and easily be done now with how technology is advanced. Our capability to merge different data sources together to create that provenance is also not difficult. So it then becomes this notion of, well, who owns the data? But I mean, when it comes to the utility life cycle and the impact to a city or the impact to operation of a private site and a maintenance program and what else needs to happen, there's ways around that, in my opinion, like metadata or unlabeled utilities. So any perceived risk or non-perceived risk can be removed. That can be all part of what that experience looks like. But I really do think that's a future state. We're still at really step one of getting people to go, well, let's just manage it first. Just be aware of the risk and manage it today, and then we can worry about data ownership later. For the record, the work that we do, we don't own any of it. The data is not ours. So, the person who does the work is the owner and the custodian of it. We just facilitate the management of it for them in a cloud instance that they also license.
Yeah. Well, I think we would be remiss if we didn't. I want to make sure we give you an opportunity to talk about, under maps and under dots and the concept of those, but just also GIS. We talk a lot about GIS in this podcast too. So, I think it's a passionate subject for us. But can you maybe just give us a really kind of dive in a little bit to the under maps and under dots and GIS and like how all of that is connected through your system, and just what really, I feel like that's somewhat of the secret sauce in some ways. So just, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I don't want to plug it too much, because this has been a really good conversation around the macro problem.
Yeah.
Our team though did build and develop and continue to develop our capability within Undermaps, because it solves a problem that's not being solved today. So Undermaps is a utility management cloud platform.
Mm-hmm.
It enables you to merge together, conflate together all the different data sources we've been talking about, right from those as-built information through the automation of PDFs and interpretation of hand drawings, right through to CCTV footage or LiDAR or drone and everything in between, to create a single source of truth that we call the unified utility model. But really all it is it's a system of record.
Mm-hmm.
It's a 3D accurate digital twin of what the underground looks like, and the platform enables you to improve that over time. So cool. An enduring asset, which is increases in value over time. Really, really cool. We've got many people using it and all around the world. We've got organizations in the US and Germany, like you mentioned before, Mike, and in the UK and Singapore, through Australia. So it's being leveraged everywhere, and the adoption is getting more and more too. It really helps for stakeholder management and communication, so that alignment around risk and what needs to happen is facilitated in a much better way.
Got it.
Right.
The underdots piece of it is a proprietary data processing capability of ours that we leverage automation on. It's actually a feature that sits within Undermaps, so you need to visualize it through Undermaps, but it rapidly processes multi-channel GPR data, so multi-channel ground penetrating radar that's attached to a vehicle and can drive at road speed, and then interprets the inflection points with automation around where this risk might sit. The best way to think about it is it's like an X-ray of where the risk might be.
Yeah.
So it means you can pinpoint on further investigation.
Yeah. I had actually looked at that a little bit, and shameless. I'll do the plug. I actually thought it was really cool, because I am not a GPR expert. I won't claim to be, but my experience has been that interpreting GPR data is one of the most difficult types of remote sensing out there. I know I can look at a point cloud and I can be like, okay, I know where the trees are, so that. But I have been shown GPR scan after GPR scan, and a guy points and says, "That's a 2-inch, water pipe or something." I know it, and I'm like, I don't know, it's looking at like an X-ray to me, and a doctor points at it. I'm like, how do you know that? And so making that more like user accessible and understandable, I can absolutely see the value there, because GPR is a weird one.
Well, that's a better plug than I was going to do, so thanks, Scott. You're 100% right, though. I've been out on the field, so I'm not someone that can operate a ground penetrating radar machine effectively, but I can push that card around, or I can look at that data and I can make all sorts of assumptions. So the value comes on the team that are highly experienced in using it, and then using that knowledge to train a model, so machine learning, then using that machine learning to move into automation, which is AI. AI is used too much, but that's human knowledge that enables automation, that enables us to do what we do. And the danger of it is if someone else claims to do it and they don't have that pedigree, then the risk profile may not change that much.
Right.
Because like you, Scott, I've looked at a GPR screen before. You're telling me that there's something under there, and all I can see is like, remember the old days when TV stopped and it was just a grey screen? That's what
exactly. Like I need to change the channel.
That's right. Yeah.
Very interesting, right?
What has you excited about the future of underground mapping?
Oh, that's such a good question. I'm excited by the growing notion that change needs to happen. Like humans, they get there eventually. Doing the same thing and expecting a different result is absolutely bonkers. And we want everyone to be able to benefit from what underground intelligence does, right from the designers through to the construction workers, through to the asset owners, public or private. And the long and short of it is if that insurance is taken out on understanding what's there, then everyone benefits.
Mm-hmm.
More can be delivered. It creates more prosperity. There'll be more jobs. There'll be more confidence in regards to what can be built and why. And it just is better for the economy. It also means that people out there on the end of the shovel are safer. So, their families aren't at risk of losing a loved one.
Yeah.
There's no downside to it. So what excites me is mass adoption. Again, whether it's with Reveal or not, whether or not that the data model that's created at the back of it is integrated into GIS or not, it's just about lifting the awareness and lifting what's possible for all of us.
Yeah. I really appreciate that, because again, I keep going back to my background in construction. Like that, it is a difficult industry on the good days, and if there's things that are being put in place that help streamline the process and reduce delays, and it's just, I think the workforce is dwindling, and the amount of people that want to be in the industry and deal with some of the challenges that there's tons of reward in the construction industry, but there's a fair share of challenging times as well. So I am celebrating any service, any like advancement and innovation that helps streamline that process, and it's just fantastic to hear about what you guys are doing.
Oh, so good to hear. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, we like to end each episode with something that inspired you, whether it was an experience, a book you read, or an article or show or a movie. It could be anything. Like, what is? Do you have some words of wisdom and of inspiration that you want to part our guests with?
I am inspired every day. Life's too short not to be, and I feel quite lucky and humbled in some of the experiences that I've been part of. I think back to my early life. What inspired me was, success on the sports field and seeing other people being successful on the sports field. And I used to play professional cricket, which is a sport that you guys probably aren't aware of, but I think baseball was created out of it. And some of the things that people were able to do, not me, I wasn't good enough, but the willingness to succeed inspired me, and that echoed across the many different sports, and watching people's determination to get a thing done was awesome. I was inspired by my mum. I was growing up just with a single mum, she worked her fingers to the bone to make life better for me, and I've taken that on. My wife and I have taken that on to make sure we're doing the same for our children. And again, everyday work that people do is inspirational, because humans are amazing. There's so much badness in the world that can make you just want to pull the curtain down and not go out there. But there's also so many brilliant people out there that are driving change. Yeah. And that's the stuff for me that inspires. It really does. When I started getting serious in my career, you mentioned SAS. That's at the time when I was there, it was the world's largest privately owned software company. It was Jim Goodnight, Dr. Jim Goodnight. It was the founder based out of North Carolina. I mean, that was inspiring. If you don't know what he did and how to get that business off the ground, that's worth some research, because it was phenomenal. Yeah. And then the whole notion of doing some great things, forcing change, getting people to use information to operate differently has really stuck with me for the rest of my career. So it sounds probably a little bit too romantic, but I'm inspired every day by what people do and the goodness in people.
Yeah. No, I love that. That's a great attitude to have.
Thanks, Scott.
Yeah. Well, Nick, this has really been amazing to hear about everything that you're up to, like understand the challenges that, lie beneath what lies beneath. And I think with that, there are...
Sounds like a movie, eh? We should make a movie out of that.
Exactly. That is a movie.
Yeah. We'll do part 2.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure. We pretty much leave every guest with we'd love to have you back on and hear what you're up to down the road. So we can make that commitment, and we'll definitely be in touch. But just amazing work you guys are doing, and I love the as you said, the staying focused on the problem statement and working the issue and quite literally saving lives. And I just think that it's awesome work, and really appreciate the conversation and your time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Mike. And thank you, Scott. A thoroughly enjoyable conversation. I'm looking forward to my cup of coffee after this. But
yeah,
there you go. Perfect. Yeah.
Thank you.
We're on the opposite side of that spectrum here. We're getting the happy hour time. All right. Well, take care, Nick, and we'll hope to connect again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, gents.